An officer stops a motorist who looks strikingly like his late son. On the dashboard, he sees something completely out of left field as he gets closer to the car. We would appreciate your engagement with our content before we embark on this exciting adventure. We would greatly appreciate it if you could click the like button and subscribe to our channel. As a longtime police officer, Ernest had witnessed it all. It was a heavy burden every day after his son Irvin died in Iraq. He saw a truck coming today. Something about the driver's expression hit him as it approached. Strangely, the driver had an uncanny resemblance, almost too familiar. Ernest was mentally puzzled. The similarity was unsettling. Looking at his own son's lifeless body was like staring into space. Like a bolt of lightning, the impact of it shocked him. Embossed on the truck's bumper was a military emblem. Officer Ernest immediately began to drive toward the truck in his patrol cruiser. William Jaswinski was driving peacefully. He had survived post-traumatic stress disorder. In his rearview mirror, he caught sight of a police car's flashing lights as he continued to drive. It threw William for a loop. He pulled over despite not being fast or having missed any stop signs. Heart racing, Officer Ernest stepped out of his patrol vehicle. He noticed he was slowing down as he got closer to the truck. As he approached the driver, his certainty about the resemblance grew. Approaching the driver's side window, he abruptly halted. Incredulous, he let out a gasp. The young man behind the wheel bore a striking resemblance to his late son. The officer's expression turned to one of shock and bewilderment, which William could make out. The officer did nothing more than stand there, gaping at him as if he had encountered a spirit. William found this troubling. He inquired as to the officer's well-being in an effort to grab his attention, but the man remained motionless. The cop finally appeared to break out of his stupor after what seemed like an endless wait. After blinking many times, he shook his head to clear it. "Good morning," Officer Ernest uttered with a quiver in his voice. "I'm sorry. I just thought you were someone else for a moment." William couldn't understand the officer's actions. He wanted to know if he had messed up in any way. Still disoriented, the cop could only shake his head. William hadn't broken any rules. William was stopped by the officer to express his gratitude for his service, as he had noticed a military bumper sticker on his truck. Then he stated something that William didn't expect, that William was like his son, who was in the military. William calmed down. He was grateful to have served his nation and thanked the officer for his compliments. When William saw that the officer was crying, he wanted to know if the officer's son had also served. Tragically, Ernest gave a nod of approval. Sympathy washed over William. The man informed the police officer that he too had served in Iraq. He served for 15 months at Fort Benning, Georgia, after his return, and then left the Army. It seems that William's words brought some solace to Officer Ernest. He spoke about his son's delight in serving with a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. "It was tragic that it had taken his life," he murmured. William observed the officer's face transform from one of professionalism to one of vulnerability while he sat in his truck. Something like anguish and yearning was visible in Officer Ernest's eyes. William was more than willing to listen, as Ernest soon started to tell his tragic tale. As Officer Ernest started to recount his son's formative years, a gentle expression spread across his face. As a young man, Irvin had been full of life and energy. His inquisitive nature had been evident since he was a little boy. Ernest saw him as his crowning achievement. Even though Irvin had a wonderful home life, it wasn't without its struggles. Working long hours for inadequate remuneration was Ernest's reality as a police officer. Ernest and Sarah had several fights since the family was struggling financially due to the increasing cost of living. Because of these stresses, their once solid bond started to weaken. The continual strife at home had worn Irvin down by the time he was 17 years old. He liked his parents very much, but he couldn't stand being around all their bickering. Irvin enrolled in the Army immediately following high school, without telling his parents, in search of an escape and a feeling of purpose. It was a decision that would change his life. Ernest and Sarah, Irvin's parents, were rattled by his choice. The idea of him going to war worried them, particularly considering the unstable situation in the Middle East. Nevertheless, Irvin remained resolute. Away from the domestic turmoil, he yearned to serve his nation. Ernest went from terrified to cautiously proud after safely completing basic training in his first tour. Honor, duty, and service were principles he saw in his courageous and devoted son. Sarah, on the other hand, was still terrified and begged Irvin to think of a safer way out of Iraq. Irvin, though, remained unwavering. His sense of duty to his fellow soldiers and his faith in his mission drove him forward. Irvin finished 2 further tours despite his mother's pleadings. Despite his mother's persistent anxieties, he took comfort in his father's sense of pride. It is unfortunate that Irvin was killed in action during his 3rd deployment. The news broke their hearts. The day they heard the knock that altered their course was one that Ernest recalled with great clarity. Their greatest suspicions were validated when they beheld police in uniform. The family fell apart due to the loss. Lizzie and Sarah held Ernest responsible for Irvin's decision to enlist in the military. Irvin may still be alive, they thought, if he had discouraged him. Because of this mindset and their shared pain, Ernest and his wife became estranged. Sarah got a divorce from him after 23 years of marriage and kept their daughter, who was 16 years old at the time. William could perceive Ernest's profound pride in his kid and his profound affection for him as he recounted his story. Ernest also bore a heavy burden of anguish. Both Ernest's kid and his family had died. He was proud of Irvin's bravery, but he couldn't stop wondering, was he responsible for his son's death? These uncertainties tormented him nightly. William felt the same way. He knew the anguish of such a deep loss from his own experiences with losing friends. Even though he couldn't do anything to alleviate Ernest's suffering, he clung to the idea that just listening may provide some solace. As Ernest thanked William for listening, he regained his composure. He admitted that seeing William brought up painful memories of his son. William comforted Ernest by assuring him of Irvin's bravery. All of a sudden, Ernest noticed a folded American flag on William's dashboard, remarkably identical to the one he had gotten following Irvin's passing. Ernest, his voice quivering, pointed it out. William elaborated that the flag was a memorial to his dead soldiers, especially his best friend Jeb. He started telling their story, including how they became close in the perilous convoy missions they completed in Iraq. William had always drawn strength from Jeb's courage and wit. The description of the deadly ambush that left Jeb badly injured was given by William, but his voice quivered. He remembered frantically attempting to rescue Jeb by racing to his side. William recounted Jeb's last words, a declaration of brotherhood and pride, with great emotion. Grief and reverence for departed comrades brought the 2 guys together, breaking the age barrier in a moment of understanding. William suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that permeated his entire being after Jeb's death. In an effort to manage his seizures, nightmares, and destructive impulses, he had recently returned from a rehabilitation program. Kate, who was always worried about him, felt the burden of his condition on their marriage. In a terrifying occurrence, Kate discovered William standing alone on their roof, completely absorbed in his thoughts. This made his struggle very clear. William felt compelled to concentrate on his recovery after this incident intensified her anxieties and relationship strain. William took comfort in the folded flag resting on his dashboard, even if he faced many obstacles. As if his friend were still riding shotgun with him, it served as a constant reminder of Jeb's bravery and helped keep his memory alive. With tears welling up in his eyes, Ernest listened empathically. His own loss was echoed by the story of Jeb. They were no longer an officer and citizen. They were just 2 men brought together by loss. "I appreciate you telling Jeb's story," Ernest remarked, placing his hand on William's shoulder. "My son would have been honored to know men like you and Jeb." William was taken aback when Ernest unexpectedly requested that he exit the truck. William felt the gravity of the situation and reluctantly agreed. With a mix of sadness and appreciation visible in his eyes, Ernest said to the officer, "Would you grant me an embrace? You are incredibly similar to my son." William silently approached the officer, embraced him, and stepped forward. As they experienced a powerful bond and healing together, they embraced each other closely, tears streaming down their faces. Their intense sorrow was somewhat alleviated by the embrace. Ernest retrieved his handkerchief as they separated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a picture of a smiling young soldier. "This is my son, Irvin," Ernest replied, his voice choked with grief. William's jaw dropped in disbelief. "That's Jeb," he shouted. "We called him Jeb in the field." They were both taken aback by the realization. William was there for Irvin when he passed away. They were taken aback by this unlikely encounter. William thought it was a miracle. Ernest had an indescribable sense of relief upon learning of his son's final moments from an eyewitness. The men found new solace in the unexpected bond that the experience formed, which helped them overcome their common grief. "I appreciate you telling me your story and giving me that hug," William remarked with genuine gratitude. This was more important than I had anticipated. William had helped Ernest find peace about his son, and Ernest expressed his appreciation by squeezing his hand. They felt a sense of relief and healing from their unexpected encounter, so they exchanged contact information before parting ways. After learning something new about his best friend, William's heart felt lighter as he drove away. With a fresh sense of belonging to his kid, Ernest watched as he walked away. Both guys thought about how their encounter had changed their lives in the days after it. What started off as an ordinary traffic stop turned into a poignant moment for the two of them. William and Ernest maintained contact. Their unanticipated bond helped them cope with their loss. They comforted one another by remembering Irvin and Jeb together, and by lending each other emotional support as they continued to mend. Their narrative is a moving reminder of the importance of shared experiences in easing the pain of loss and the surprising connections that can bring solace during difficult times.